My name is Jim Halley. My original background very much in engineering. What I have learned is that mediation is one of those life skills that I would regard as important from the point of view that, having carried out well over 500 mediations in 22 years, it has become my preferred way of assisting parties resolve their disputes. What's good about it is that, to a very large extent, what you're doing is you're not imposing a solution on anybody. You're assisting the parties to find a solution or a number of solutions themselves. Life has taught us that there are advantages in having a trusted third party neutral around. Many of us have had the experience of maybe ringing up a friend and saying, I need to have a chat with you about something. Or many of us have had in our ordinary everyday lives, we've been approached by friends and parties who've come along and said to us, look, we need somebody just to help us have this conversation. And that, to a very large extent, is where mediation has grown from. It's also a practice that goes back about 7,000 years to the Egyptians. You can read about it in Socrates' Athens, the city-state of Athens, where it was used during the courts of Athens to resolve many, many disputes. Well, it's very, very difficult to put percentages on it, particularly when I'm looking at it over 22 years. But if I was to guess, I'd say we would be up around 90% success rate. Having said that, it's also important to look at what is an outcome from mediation, because in many instances it's not necessarily an agreement where everybody goes away happy. It is often where individuals within disputes come to a realization that maybe I do need to terminate this relationship. Maybe I do need to find a way of resolving and moving myself from it. But then the mediator can assist in bringing that about in an amicable way. The process, from my perspective, would be that once the parties have agreed to go to mediation, well, the first thing I would do is I would meet them together for a very short period of time, probably 5-10 minutes, and I would explain the essential ground rules to mediation. Then I would break and I would go through what I call the pre-mediation process. So in other words, I would meet with each party separately to get a full and comprehensive understanding of how they see the particular issues that they want to bring to mediation. What is the background to it? What is the impact of it? What do they feel needs to happen? What might they consider to be a satisfactory outcome? I would do that with both parties so that I have an understanding of where they want to get to. Then I bring them back and we would sign what we call then the pre-mediation agreement. In other words, a pre-mediation agreement is a simple document that sets out a few basic rules around the engagement process. It looks at confidentiality, it looks at neutrality and so on. It agrees to nothing else other than to mediate. We then commence with the mediation process itself, and where we would invite one or the other of the parties to commence, to tell their story, to set out their stall. We would then ask the other party to tell their story, set out their stall, and then we would ask them to respond to what they've just heard. We would tend to move on then and look at what we need to clarify, what we need to reframe, what the emerging agenda is actually going to look like. Beyond that then, we begin to look at what options or option might resolve each area of the dispute. And we would be anxious not to prematurely jump on any one option until we've explored all others. So there's a trafficking of dialogue and conversation between the parties as this process goes on. Some of the dialogue is in what we call joint session. The other would be in separate one-to-one meetings or caucus sessions, as they're sometimes referred to. Following that, then, we would move on to what the heads of an agreement might look like. And if the parties are there with their legal representatives, that's one of the things that I would then ask the legal people to begin to do. In other words, if we have the heads of agreement emerging, I would invite the legal representatives to begin to put what we would refer as the mediation agreement together. That's brought back, discussed, tested, and then we move on to signing and closure. Sometimes it's important to build in a capacity to review the outcome of the mediation. So in certain circumstances there might be a value in meeting 2 to 3 months later or a month later and reviewing where the commitments that we've all entered into honoured, and can we now regard the process as finally and complete. So that's the sense of it. Most mediations that I'm involved in would take a day or less. Some take longer depending on what the circumstances are. I would say to a solicitor or a barrister that if they are to have a role in it, and if they want to have a role in it, it's important that they have a role from the outset. So for example, I would recommend that they might get involved in the selection of the mediator and how that mediator is selected. My own personal experience is that when people come to me with difficulties, is that often they're so laced with emotion that they actually have, I suppose for the best way I can put it is, they have confused the role of thinking and feeling. So they might feel very, very upset by what has happened and can't think it through. Or indeed, it might be the opposite. They might have thought it through and not considered the emotional impact on it for themselves or others, depending on what the circumstances.